Welcome to our town council meeting. It's getting close to Easter, so we've had a lot of snacks back there, and I believe it held a few people behind. But we're all good, and we're ready to get started here. So with that, I'd go ahead and like to call the town council meeting for Tuesday, April 4th, 2023, here at the Yucca Valley Community Center room to order. Roll call, please.
Council members Abel,
Here.
Droz,
Here.
Lombardo,
Here.
Schooler,
Here.
and Mayor Dennison.
Here. So tonight, we'll go ahead and start off with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to ask Councilmember Schooler to lead us this evening. And we'll have an invocation following by Pastor Mark Tometz from the Yucca Valley First Christian Church. So please remain standing.
Ready to begin.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our Father in heaven, may your name be kept holy. We pray for your kingdom to come and your will to be done here on earth as it is in heaven. We pray today for our daily bread and that you would forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. We pray that you would keep us from evil, that you would lead us away from temptation. We know that yours is a kingdom, power, and glory forever and ever. I pray for this town, for its council members and employees, and for all that they discuss today and from here on out. May you bless them and guide them in all wisdom. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. We appreciate it. We have nothing listing, but I'll check with staff. Any presentations this evening? All right. We'll go ahead and move forward with the approval of the agenda for this evening.
Mayor, I'd like to move tonight's agenda as presented.
Thank you. In a second.
Second.
All right, we have first and second. Roll call vote.
Council members Abel,
Yes.
Droz,
Yes.
Lombardo, Schooler,
Yes.
and Mayor Dennison.
Yes. All right, we'll move on to our consent agenda. All items listed on the consent agenda are routine matters or formal documents covering previous town council instruction. Items are enacted by one motion and a second without separate discussion unless a member of the town council or town staff requests dialogue on a specific item at the beginning of the meeting. Request for public comments on the consent agenda. Item should be filed with the town clerk. So we'll reach to staff for any changes.
Yes, town staff has requested to make a comment on item number 3. We had to make an adjustment. So if we could pull that from consent, and I'll do a quick staff report and request a motion from council to approve.
Thank you. Are there any comments on the consent? Otherwise, we'll look for approval of the consent agenda, items 1 through 4, removing 3 for comment. Any public comments on the items on consent agenda? See none online? Nothing online.
I'll make the motion to approve the consent agenda minus item number 3.
All right, thank you.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
Council members Abel,
Yes.
Droz,
Yes.
Lombardo,
Yes.
Schooler,
Yes.
and Mayor Dennison.
Yes. Okay, staff, item number 3.
Yes, item number 3 is the amended fiscal year 2022-23 salary schedule. In your agenda, there is a calculation correction within the tables, and for the updated attachment, the effective date was January 1st, and it needed to be updated to February 25th. That will conclude staff's presentation. If you have any questions, otherwise, the recommendation is that the town council approves the recommended changes to the 2022-23 salary schedule.
All right, thank you for that update. We'll bring that back for public comment. Any comments on item number 3 that was removed? Seeing none, council? All right, so we'll look for a motion to include item number 3.
I'll make a motion we approve the amended salary schedule presented.
I'll second.
Councilmember Zabel,
Yes.
Droz,
Yes.
Lombardo,
Yes.
Schooler,
Yes.
and Mayor Dennison.
Yes. And so now we're going to move on to our department reports. Item number 5, Prop 68 Aquatic Center Project Budget Resolution.
Yes, that's me again.
You're busy.
All right, this evening I'll be presenting the Prop 68 Aquatic Center Project Budget Resolution. So I'll go through a brief presentation just describing the cost estimates and the budget process, and then the recommendation for you. So as we go through this, the recommendation is that the Town Council adopts a resolution that's going to amend the current year and the next fiscal year's Special Revenue Fund budgets, and that will allocate funds for the Aquatic and Recreation Center project and construction costs. So the cost estimates are provided within the agenda. Those were provided by HMC Architects, contracted service provider, MTI, which includes all of the construction, soft costs, and contingency costs for the project at the current scope. And then there was also a second estimate provided by the Dahlin Project Management Service, and that was done by Cummings. So those cost estimates include details of all of the different materials, service providers, furnitures and fixtures, everything at the current market value as of today, based off of, again, the current scope, which is at 95% of the current construction design. And then lastly, I just point out in that construction estimate, there are contingencies in the design phase, the construction phase, and also an overall project contingency, and those may or may not be used in those cost estimates. So this is a current budget projection. Just to note that this includes several different aspects of a very dynamic project. So you'll see there that the estimated project cost includes not only the aquatic center, but also the gymnasium, an additional solar generation project, and then also Brim Park infrastructure improvements. So I would just like to highlight on that budget projection there, the construction estimate will most likely range from $25 million to a high of $27 million. The recommended funding allocations are provided from 4 different special revenue funds. So the first would be the Capital Projects Financing Fund, which would provide roughly half of the additional funding required. So this funding allocation would help align with budget policy and also confirm that this project is fully funded as of today. Each funding allocation ensures that sufficient fund balances are left in these appropriating special revenue fund accounts. And then since these are estimates of costs and projected balances, it's just important to know that we'll continue to review the project costs, and if better funding allocations or different cost estimates arise, then we'll come back to council and readjust as necessary, but we'll be reviewing it on a regular basis. So just key highlights would be, again, that current construction cost estimate is ranging from the $25 million to $27 million for all of the project amounts that I've highlighted. The project is fully funded, and then we have already instituted operational reserves that we have assigned when we did the year-end excess allocation. So the Aquatic and Recreation Center will have a reserve allocation for future maintenance and capital improvements over the years. And we expect that this project will be completed in the first quarter of 2025. So again, the recommendation is before you to adopt a resolution amending the fiscal year 2022 through 24 Special Revenue Fund budgets as indicated in the exhibit within the agenda, and to allocate those funds for the remainder of the construction costs. I'll be available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that update. Is there anyone in the public who'd like to make a comment on this item, item number 5, with our aquatic center? Anyone online? Nothing online? Bring it back to council.
It's really going to be a great project, and I'm happy to see it moving forward as it is. I like the other things that are being considered as portions of the project. The solar generation area will help make it more efficient to run in the future as well. So I'm excited about that, and the changes to Brim Park will be enjoyed by all for a long time. So it's all on the right track. I'm really happy with it. I think we're in for a good project.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I also agree. I'm thankful that some of the costs are now stabilizing with the world the way it is and so forth, and we're sort of past that for right now. So it's good to have people looking at the numbers and so forth. And again, I do appreciate the increase in the solar capacity, so that we're a lot greener than we might have been, and also help with future costs and help to budget the operations in the future. So thank you for the presentation, and appreciate the information, and I'm pleased with it as well. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I have one other thing to say.
Yes, please.
I'm really pleased that we're presenting this fully funded, and we have a lot of thanks to be given to the staff and the council for anticipating the need for this and securing some financing when the interest rates were low, and the use of our Measure Y money makes a big difference, and the public can see where this money is being used. And it will be a really landmark facility for Yucca Valley for a long time. I think it's going to add a lot of value to our way of life here. I think there's a lot of opportunities for it. And planning ahead helped us get, is it like 2% money? 2.3% money in today's market is outstanding. It's a long-term thing so it's as affordable as it can be. The numbers are always shocking when you look at things, but it's necessary, and it's definitely in line with what's going on around us, and just really pleased with it. Everybody's done a great job. Thank you for all your efforts.
Yeah, good comments. I'd just like to say one thing. If anyone hasn't been over towards the Brem Park Little League area lately, there's a lot of other things going on, and on this project was inclusive of the whole area as one. It's mentioned as Brem Park area with ARC there, and there's other improvements that you've heard already mentioned. It's really changed a lot. We put a lot of work into keeping our parks up to date. We have another one at the Essex Park that's underway right now. So these are things to try and keep things current, relevant, and in a place where people can relax. I just want to give a shout out to our entire community. Measure Y was a large portion of this, if you looked on the presentation, and that was directly the result of this community coming together, understanding that we could make improvements in public safety, our infrastructure, and our quality of life activities. And this covers a lot of those bases. It's a big piece of our community, and it'll be here for 50 plus years easily until it needs more attention. So thank you. With that, I'd like to go ahead and make the recommendation that we adopt the resolution number 2310 on the special revenue fund budget.
I'll second.
Councilmember Zabel,
Yes.
Droz,
Yes.
Lombardo,
Yes.
Schooler,
Yes.
and Mayor Dennison.
Yes. With that, we'll move on to item number 6, our Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act legislation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I wanted to spend a few minutes giving you an update on legislation that has been discussed at the state level as part of the budget process, and then ultimately get your direction on a formal position for the town of Yucca Valley on this legislation. The Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act has been drafted as a budget trailer bill in the current legislative session. It is progressing through the state's budget process. And then obviously it may be adopted concurrent with or as a trailer bill even after subsequent to budget adoption at the state level. This is a little bit different than some of your more traditional state legislation that ends up going through a different process than the budget process. That other legislative process, your more traditional one, would have multiple hearings, multiple opportunities for input, revisions, public hearing, public discourse. As a budget trailer bill, it's a little bit different, maybe a little more streamlined, and then ultimately it provides flexibility in how they move that forward in a relatively timely fashion. So we would anticipate if this Conservation Act language is approved at the state level as part of the budget process. It may occur in the month of June, July, August. We would expect it to be determined at that time. I want to make clear for the council as well as our residents here in town that there are two separate actions that are kind of on a parallel path. One is the petition to list the Western Joshua Tree in accordance with California Endangered Species Act, or CISA. That is different and separate than this Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act. And so both of those actions are moving forward kind of simultaneously. On the left there, the petition for listing before the Fish and Game Commission. That petition has not been determined in final. There's no decision made yet by the Fish and Game Commission. They will need to act on that at some point. Just to remind the council and the public, the town is and remains committed to advocating for the Fish and Game Commission to accept the Department of Fish and Wildlife's recommendation, which by their own admission was based on the best available science. If the commission does that, then they would recognize that listing is not warranted at this time. Interestingly, just within the last month, the Biden administration, through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, on March 9th, 2023, published its 12-month finding that, this is again at the federal level, that the Joshua Tree does not warrant protection under the Endangered Species Act of 1973. This conclusion comes after a second in-depth review of the two Joshua Tree species. The U.S. FWS reviewed threats to the species, such as wildfire, invasive species, climate impacts, habitat loss, and fragmentation. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service determined that the Joshua Tree's resiliency, redundancy, and representation was sufficient to not be at risk of becoming endangered in the foreseeable future. Again, that was with the department through the Biden administration just as of last month. I think the Department of Fish and Wildlife at the state level obviously came to the same conclusion, and that's the recommendation that they have before the commission. That's all related to the petition before the Fish and Game Commission. Separately, but also moving on that same time frame generally, is the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act. This is a secondary legislative path providing for protection of a species. If this legislation were to be passed, it'd be the first time that that's going to occur at this scale. This is independent of, I didn't finish that bullet point apparently, it's independent of the petition action that's moving forward there on your left. It may or may not advance through the budget process, but and I'll talk about this on the last bullet point, we believe that it will. Interestingly though, as legislation, even if it's adopted through the budget process, it could be amended in the future through subsequent legislative action, which is different than the Fish and Game Commission. If they were to try and modify the CISA finding, that's a very different process than legislative action. So in many respects, having that legislation in place may provide for future amendment in possibly a more streamlined fashion if it were to be approved. Importantly, we believe that currently the legislation has critical support, and what we mean by that is the primary players, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the petitioner, who is the Center for Biological Diversity, Fish and Game Commission, and then obviously the administration, having it come as a budget bill, all seem to have support for the general construct of the legislation. So with that in place, I'm not certain that there's going to be a whole lot of opportunity for modification to it, nor does it seem likely that it may be derailed, if you will. A couple of the highlights of the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act. Interestingly, it achieves similar outcomes as a California Endangered Species Act listing, but it does so through a legislative process. And again, that's pretty different. Provides for landscape conservation. Landscape conservation meaning that the conservation is done by buying significant swaths of land, so the entire landscape is being saved in certain areas that promote the Western Joshua Tree. The Conservation Act includes provisions addressing housing industry needs. It also provides the same for large-scale solar needs. Both of those industries, interestingly, are supportive of the legislation as drafted. And then lastly, it provides take permit authority to the Department of Fish and Wildlife in limited ministerial projects, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So what might that do for the town of Yucca Valley? It would provide very limited and narrow ability for our residents, homeowners, property owners to be able to get a take permit, and by that we just mean the ability to move or touch or transplant or destroy a tree for certain projects. Those projects are limited to single residence infill primarily, accessory dwelling units, or public works projects. There's a limit to how many trees can be taken per project, and that's 10 for a kind of a private party project, and then for a public works project, it bumps up to 40. And then, of course, there's required mitigation fees that about $125 is at the minimum, and then it can range up to $2,500 per tree, depending on your location, how close you are in proximity to the national park or any national park boundary, and then, of course, how tall the tree is or how big the tree is. Additional provisions in the legislation require reporting, substantial reporting, and then, importantly, the Department of Fish and Wildlife can delegate this permit authority under certain conditions to a city or a county. So the town, if the town were interested in taking that permit authority, could be granted that under certain conditions by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. What is our recommendation in terms of how do we respond to the legislation? Again, we don't know exactly, based on our kind of reading of the tea leaves, that there's a whole lot of influence that the town of Yucca Valley is going to have on this legislation. But we do think it's important for our residents and property owners to know what our position is. We've kind of split it up into two different ways. Number one, if the Western Joshua tree is not listed, then we would oppose this legislation. And that would allow then for local conservation and management as we've done prior. If the Western Joshua tree is listed by the Fish and Game Commission, we would still oppose unless amended. And then if amended to address certain town concerns, the town could take a neutral position on the legislation. Again, and the reason for that, going back to our conversation at the beginning, which was the best available science from the Department of Fish and Wildlife at the state level, and now at the federal level through the Biden administration's Fish and Wildlife Service, both indicated that it's not warranted. So pretty clear there. The amendments that we would seek primarily revolve around definition of a tree. In the legislation, a tree is defined as any tree, any stem, any pup. Each one is individual, and you'll see that in a minute here. Then in conjunction with that is the limit of the tree take, which is 10 trees or 40 trees for a public works project. And lastly, infill of commercial development in our area, in our populated commercial quarter. We have infill commercial development that could occur, and in many of these places, there's actually very, very few Joshua trees. Yet they would not be able to take advantage of any of the provisions for streamlined permitting or mitigation. They would have to go through the incidental take permit if the tree is in fact listed. Why do we have concerns about that? Well, this is a picture right out here in the front lot that I took the other day. Based on that, if you have that in your yard and you want to put in a sidewalk, swimming pool, granny flat, if that's your lot and you want to put in a single family residence, each one of those is counted individually. So you see there's 11, and I think I probably missed a couple on the backside. But 11 would put you over the limit. You would now be required to file for an incidental take permit and go through the CEQA process, go through the incidental take permit process. That exercise plus mitigation, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50,000, depending on how many trees you ultimately end up having to move and what the mitigation measure would be. That would be determined by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So it doesn't work in this area, and that's really the sad part of it. It's a one-size-fits-all legislation that doesn't recognize populated and disturbed areas. And if you think about a residence with an infill and they have these trees, the preservation of trees, even by the definition of this legislation and the intent, is at a landscape level. They want to be able to buy large areas of land to promote and encourage the tree. That's not going to occur in an infill lot surrounded by homes on all sides. So it's just not a common sense solution. And that's why I don't think the town would ever be in a position that we could support it, even if amended. At the very best, if it's listed, we would like some avenue or some path, while the act of listing probably ends up in litigation somewhere. At least the resident may have an opportunity to put in their sidewalk or swimming pool or whatever they want to do on their property. And so that's why we would probably take a neutral position, at least if they address some of these items that we've highlighted here, particularly with the definition of a tree or the number of maximum trees that can be taken. Some of this may sound familiar to you, and it is. It's very similar to the language that we had during the one-year period when what they had was a 2084, that process where we were able to issue permits. Very similar, but even in that language at that time, we had the definition of a tree was a tree and anything around it within 3 feet. Much different than what we're seeing here. So those are our concerns. The recommended action, we can go on this conversation for quite some time, but to bring it to close here, based on the town's desire to advocate and protect the residents, property owners, visitors, businesses of the town, we would oppose the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act unless amended. We would ask for council direction to communicate the concerns to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Maybe there's some outside chance that they can work to modify or tweak the language to address some of these concerns that we have. We would also communicate those concerns to a legislative author once assigned. And then it's probably helpful for our residents to know what the town is doing, what our position is, and why. And so we would put together a press release, kind of highlight these bullet points and get that out here in the next week or so. I think that's it, council. Be happy to answer questions after you take public comment on this issue.
Thank you very much, staff, for that outline. Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment on this item? Item number 6, Western Joshua Tree, online? Nothing? Okay, we'll bring it back to council. Any council comments?
Yeah, I'll go. Curtis, is the definition of a Joshua tree at all negotiable? I mean, you showed us 11 Joshua trees. Is there any chance that that could be considered one tree since all those pups are associated with one, or do we have any say-so in that?
I think the short answer is no. We can express our concerns, and if I were to venture that there would be any modification, it may be in the maximum number. So maybe that gets raised where each tree is still counted. Because remember, each tree, not only is it counted for towards the limit that you have, but each tree is also associated with a mitigation fee.
Yeah.
So each one of those trees is a mitigation fee on top of it. So currently, if you're within 2 miles of the park, if you could bring that slide back up, if you would. Each one of those is, the small ones, I think 1 meter and less is $250. I think 2 to 5 is, or 1 to 5 meters is, I think $1,000, and then over 5 meters is $2,500. So all of that, sorry for the long-winded answer, but all of that is likely to incentivize the definition of the tree as it is. So if we have any ability to input, we're more concerned with the person's ability to use their property. They can't do anything with it. They're going to have to go through the ITP process. So mitigation fees notwithstanding, maybe there's a possibility that we get them to raise the cap.
So even looking directly below number 10 there, it looks like a really, really small Joshua tree. I might not even recognize a Joshua tree when it first starts coming up.
We have, they have language in there that would have an arborist assigned to your projects that, I mean, you're required to have an arborist report. They'll know what it is.
They'll take care of that for me, okay. And then the distance from a Joshua tree, if you were to put a fence up somewhere, how close could you get to this cluster here with a fence?
Yeah, so very interesting question. And there's a lot of nuance in the legislation as it was drafted. One of the things that we've heard was one of the reasons for the definition as it is and for the cap as it is was because one of the things that was removed that was in a 2084 is a distance. In the 2084 language that we had, it was 10 feet. You couldn't be within 10 feet of the tree. That language is removed. So presumably you can be right up against the tree.
And is there any consideration regarding the hookups to the sewer?
That would fall within the public works project, so your take would be 40 trees in that scenario. So I think that'd probably be less of an issue for the sewer hookup.
But those fees would still apply?
Yes.
Okay, and then if we, are we required to take, if they offer us the authority, local authority, for take permits, are we required to accept that or not?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
It's just so hard for me to comprehend this. They complain about being, the cost of housing going unaffordable for most people, and then you see things like this where they're just adding to the chaos when it costs $10,000 or $15,000 to move the trees to build something that the homeowner desires in order to use their property to their benefit without harming the overall picture of Joshua trees in our area. I just can't understand it. And, the desert used to be the most affordable place to build your home. And now it's definitely not. So I'm just disappointed with the way they are looking at things. I don't think any common sense is applied.
Yeah. All right. Well, first of all, I think we all agree that the main thing we need to try to do is to preserve as many Joshua trees as we possibly can, because obviously we love the desert environment and the ecosystem that we have. I mean, that's one of the attractions of being here is the fauna and Joshua tree being a key element of that. So I think we all agree upon that. And I also agree that, we have to worry about things like affordable housing. And when they do legislation on top of legislation that has fees and those types of things, it's counterproductive. So out of one side of their mouth, they're wanting affordable housing. They're wanting to encourage ADUs to be put on single-family homes, changing single-family residents to duplexes and so forth. And that at the other side of their mouth, they're going to perhaps be cost prohibitive to do those things. So what comes down to in Yucca Valley is going to be supply and demand. So if you're not able to develop a few of these infill lots, and I've never been a fan of tract homes and big, slaying of all kinds of property and disturbing the desert, and you don't even know you live in Yucca Valley when you see a tract home. It's going to prohibit development, and so the supply and demand is going to just continue to raise prices. So this will be a very unaffordable place to live in a short period of time, because the demand to live out here with clean air, low crime, beautiful national park, being close to Palm Springs, to Big Bear, to the river, it's a beautiful place to live. The demand's going to continue to go up, but the ability to build is going to be stagnated, so you can just count on prices being higher and higher and higher for our residents and for those trying to come into the area. So first and foremost, trying to protect the tree is very important. It's too bad that the state didn't allow the town, who's probably the most impacted community on all of California, to have a seat at the table to share these concerns early, before it's all drafted, to say, yes, we understand we want to protect the tree, but a cluster in the one root system that has 5 or 6 pups coming up is really one tree. It's just the root system is underground, and those for an endangered species, there's a lot of trees right there in that one little parking lot. So, you know, it's just too bad they didn't allow us to be at the table to come up with something logical that we could preserve the tree and be able to develop reasonably in the future. And what happens is people start seeing these little pups come up on their property. They're going to go and tear them down before anyone even knows that we're there. And so they're going to be destroying trees that had the potential to live and add to the property and add for the wildlife to be able to enjoy. And now people are going to be destroying them because they see it as a liability. And it's sort of like when they started taxing, you know, in the ancient times, trees, and it was a tax on your olive trees or whatever, and they started cutting them down because they didn't want to be taxed. It just doesn't help the situation. As far as the Department of Fish and Game, if they do enact an endangered species or some type of protection, they don't have to mirror what the state legislation is doing, correct? So they could perhaps come up with a plan that states that within 3 feet of a tree, it's considered one tree, and that there could be a certain amount that can be taken, and the fees could be different than the state fees. So could you explain that a little bit to me? How the Department of Fish and Game may come up with rules that are different than the state?
So I'm not the expert here. I'll lean on Tom and Shane to help out here, but the framework is different. So the framework for the Fish and Game Commission is to list it in accordance with California Endangered Species Act. That act is already defined, and it has methodology for how you can obtain a take permit, which is the incidental take permit process. So that process for that permit for that project, each project it stands on its own, and the review is done on its own. The mitigation measures are developed, and that process is advanced in that way. And it's important because, remember, the limit is 10. So if you're outside of the 10, if you have that tree and you still want to do something, you're going to have to use that process. And that process may be different. It may not mirror the legislation approach that's in the Conservation Act. So I'm not certain that answered your question. Any other thoughts on that?
No, the simplest way I describe it is the commission has one decision and one decision only, to list or not list. They can't create conditions. They can't create standards. The commission gets to list or not list. It's the legislation approach, which is creating essentially the exemptions from the listing. So the legislation, theoretically, in a perfect world, the legislation could be modified to where all the trees that Curtis showed in the image would be counted as one tree. So the legislative approach can do that, but the listing by the Fish and Game Commission cannot. Their only decision they can make is to list or not list. Okay.
I'll just add, and I agree with everything that's been said. It would be the legislation that would govern. And this is a very unique situation. Normally, when a species is listed as threatened or endangered, there isn't corresponding legislation that goes along with it. That's not normally how the process works. This is a bit of a unique situation, and it's a little hard to predict exactly how this would go. But in my view, it would be the legislation that would govern.
And again, if they would have allowed us to have a seat at the table to be able to help modify or come up with something that we could all live with, it wouldn't hurt the residents. They wouldn't have to go back and try to have it modified after the fact. I mean, again, it's just it's a bit frustrating. And obviously, you know, I don't condone and I don't want people out there destroying trees on their property or little pups that are coming up. But sometimes when you do something heavy-handed, it encourages people to be dishonest. And so I'm more worried about the tree and what the ramifications will be that will be counterproductive. It'll hurt the tree versus helping the tree. So again, hopefully some sensible standards will be set in motion. Hopefully there's still some dialogue to be made, but it doesn't sound very promising at this point. And I'm afraid prices of homes are going to continue to rise.
Well, pretty much everything I was going to say is said, probably better than I could. But I do want to say that people that are breaking the rules, removing Joshua trees when they're small, that could be handled much more efficiently, I think, if it was at a local level instead of going to the Fish and Game Department. I think the town would handle that better. But anyway, that's out of our hands, like we said. And I think most people that do infill development are very respectful of Joshua trees. Most people that are building a house that want to move here, that's why they want to move here, and they're very respectful of Joshua trees. In my yard, I have probably 8 or 10 coming up that are far from the host tree. I don't even know where the seeds came from. Well, I do, I mean, generally, but the thing is with all the rain, I have a lot of Joshua trees coming up, and I'm not at that edge zone where Joshua trees are maybe not surviving as well, but the point is like, some people respect that and some don't, and I'm putting rocks around them and putting wire and trying to protect them. But the thing I was going to mention also, which Councilmember Abel mentioned, was the affordability of housing in the high desert. This is going to affect that a lot. So, it's like, how do you balance, homelessness and affordable housing and charging this much money for people that want to build something and maybe somebody that wants to do some kind of affordable housing. So, but everybody said I really agree with everyone. So that's pretty much it.
And Joshua trees, for the record, Joshua trees on a property added value. As a realtor, it added value. You said you'd take pictures of the Joshua trees. You tout how many trees were on a particular parcel or that were around the home. And now it's, unfortunately, it's becoming a negative to some people. And so that's not the intent of what us as conservationists want, but that's sort of the backwards effect of over legislation. So it's really a sad point, but hopefully we can find some common ground.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. You go back in any parts of the town since I've lived here, which has been many years, a lot of the older homes have many Joshua trees in their yard. And not all of those were there when the homes were first built. It's just a result of the trees repopulating themselves as they should. I've never seen really any struggling Joshua trees other than everything else in the surrounding areas that may be attributed to the climate itself changing. Not enough rain, long periods of drought, fire, all the things that we talk about. But those are generally mitigated in a different way. Removing or protecting the Joshua tree does not change those environmental factors that threaten the tree today. That's a whole other subject that is being addressed by many, and hopefully they'll have good results. To the question of staff, I think the definition of the western Joshua tree is vital to understand what is considered a tree. And is it a pup? Is it the first sprout? Or is it just any indication of anything? Somewhere along the way, there has to be a better definition of the trees by themselves. And I agree that the count of 10, whether they're clone trees, whether they're pups or they're new sprouts in the proximity of themselves, what is the proximity? How can it affect? And I think the one-size-fit-all, as staff said, of 10 trees or on a commercial infrastructure project, community project, something like that at 40. I'm really really like to see the Department of Fish and Game follow, their research. They've been told, and then recently, as staff just mentioned, from the Biden administration stating that it wasn't warranted for the listing at this time. So that's kind of my place on it. I just know that I see many new trees popping up. I have in my yard many years, and they're there, and they seem to thrive very well. But that's okay. I enjoy it. I see that we're bound on two sides in our community We have a lot of infrastructure projects that are important to our own sustainability, which is our groundwater, and that's being hampered right now and held up in many ways because we can't tie in and stop the pollution that's occurring because of the western Joshua Tree. We have issues within our community that we need to pay attention to that are important also. So these are state mandates for our water. We have state mandates to protect the tree, and they definitely clash with no consideration of us completing this project with some type of pathway. So that's all I really have. Is there anything else to add to it?
Yeah, I want to also add one thing. If the staff does send that picture of that cluster, I would go back out, get a much more accurate count, and then I would also put the price tag of how much it would cost for the $100 tree, then add the $250 tree, and put a price tag on how much that removal of clusters would cost you.
Well,
And you could also add CEQA account, because if it's over the number, then you have CEQA expenses.
well, that's just the cost to the commission, but, you know, you also have to hire someone to go out there and move the trees. But my thing I was going to say is so many of the trees up here, I mean, it's like like I said, we're kind of in the middle of the Joshua Tree forest. You call it a forest. And when you think of the Joshua trees, you know, like say in Lancaster, they have a lot less. I mean, we're a small player in this, but we have the biggest, the biggest point in this, because we have more Joshua trees than pretty much anybody around. You know, everybody else that's involved in this might be big industry and they're building windmills somewhere and there are less Joshua trees and they're building this and that, or might be other communities. But Yucca Valley has the most densely populated Joshua trees, I think, in San Bernardino County. So we're the biggest player in this, even though we're the smallest fish, if that makes sense. So that's all I have to say.
We also have a lot of BLM land, and we have a lot of national park land, and we have preserve land. And all those, I thought, were setting aside the environment and the protecting the species, and just volume, the amount of hundreds and hundreds of miles protected by BLM, by the national park, and also the preserve, Mojave Preserve going out there, and then the sand to snow, and all those types of things. So there's a lot of other protections that are going on already. It just, again, disheartening to see people's personal property being taken from them by the government.
One last question for staff is that, so as I read through the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act, it sounds like they could actually delay any type of approval all the way till the end of 2024, December 31st. Is that correct?
I'm not certain what authority you're looking for, but the permit itself is pretty streamlined. Some of the other timeframes that they had in there was the requirement for the Department of Fish and Wildlife to come back with a conservation plan by the end of, I think, 2024. That timeframe was pretty accelerated.
Yeah,
But
it
in
has
terms
it
of
in
individual
December.
permit, it seemed to be it needed to be moved along in a timely fashion.
So the completed conservation plan still not being actually taking final action on it?
That's
It could still issue
independent.
Permits?
Yes, that's independent of the permitting process.
Okay, all right. And it
So-
shows this as a receiving.
This is, so the recommended action there is on the screen for you. This would be to oppose the WJTCA unless amended, communicate our concerns to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the legislative author as appropriate, and then to town residents if that's the desire of the council.
Yes, I would move with that recommendation to consider the items that you had discussed earlier to be included as the amendments. So I'd like
And I'll
to.
second.
Okay. I'll make the motion for that, and we have a second.
Councilmember Zabel,
Yes.
Droz,
Yes.
Lombardo,
Yes.
Schooler,
Yes.
and Mayor Dennison.
Yes. Our last item of the night is item number 7, a comprehensive fee study report. This is a draft.
Hello, Mayor and Council. I'll walk you through the comprehensive draft fee study report and provide some items for discussion on some policy guidance for town staff. So we'll quickly go over a background of how we got to a draft fee report, highlight some key items from that report, point out some guidelines for that discussion, and then go over next steps and the recommendation. So as a background, the last time the town adopted a comprehensive user fee schedule and completed a fee study report was in 2004. In May of 2021, we contracted with Willdan to do an updated fee study report. And then late last year in 2022, they provided us a draft. Town staff has been reviewing that draft and providing comments. And then we are here today to provide council that draft and get some input on how to finalize that fee adoption. So just one major thing to note was that the last time that we did a comprehensive fee study report and adopted that master fee schedule was in 2004, which was 20 years ago, and I was in middle school. So we will, on the next slide, I'm going to provide a quick little video that kind of gives us some handy information on what that is exactly and how we got that report put together for everyone. And I thought it was a lot more exciting than me rambling on about the report or reading it to you. So we'll see if this works. I haven't done a YouTube video.
The City of Novato has revised its master fee schedule, updating user and regulatory fees for fee-related city services. The fees charged pay for the cost of services provided due to the request or action of an individual or entity. Novato does not charge more than the cost of service, and the city's user fees have not been comprehensively updated since 2006. The city charges fees for a variety of specific services, including, but not limited to, building, encroachment permitting, land development engineering, parks and recreation, planning, and police. Meet Sally. Sally is planning a kitchen remodel in her home. Sally will pay fees to cover the city's expense to permit and inspect her remodel. These fees ensure that the cost of providing these city services is paid by Sally and not taxpayers. When the fees that Sally pays cover the cost for city services provided to her, this reduces the need to subsidize from other city revenue sources like the general fund, allowing the general fund to be used to maintain services and activities that benefit our community as a whole, like public safety and road improvements. Novato's revised master fee schedule is available at novato.org/fee schedule.
So thank you to the City of Novato. That was a really handy video and saved everyone a lot of time. So that was a basic overview of kind of what the point of a fee study report is to ensure that we are calculating full cost recovery and charging the appropriate amount of cost recovery for town fees and services so that those general fund dollars are used appropriately for public use rather than private use. So the fee study report has a couple other key items I was just going to highlight. The cost recovery does conform to the California Constitution and Code of Regulations, so there are no proposed fees that would be over the cost, which would be against the California Code. At the beginning of the fee study, each department was surveyed by Willdan and finance staff, and we calculated exactly how many hours it takes to do the services that we're providing to town residents or users of the town services, and then took that staff time and figured out how much that costs based off of a fully burdened rate, and then also included any potential overhead costs or additional contract service costs. So we did use fully burdened rates that were effective of personnel time of July 1st, 2023. So that would be where that dollar amount came from. The current draft that's included in the agenda is a draft, so a few of those fees The total cost of the fees aren't going to change, but some of the language or placement of the fees might change. But the important thing to note is the cost that's in there is the cost of that service. That won't vary. It does illustrate a proposal of a 100% cost recovery, except for recreation fees at this time. We are going to seek, and I'll go over it more later in the presentation, some policy direction for future adoption of a formal subsidy policy in case there are either other fees or departments that we would want to subsidize with general fund dollars, or if there's a varying methodology other than what we've provided in the draft report. Also in the draft report is a multi-year implementation. So you'll see after 20 years, costs have changed a lot. The department dynamic and personnel changed a lot. So those fees definitely varied over that amount of time. And it would be a significant increase on some of the different service fees and permit fees. So we're proposing that we phase that in to assist residents and users. So you'll see just a few key items. The average increase of all of the fees across the town was about 35%. The maximum increase of a fee from the original amount was 132%. There was a few that decreased based off of just personnel changes. Certain staffing wasn't there anymore, and contract service was less expensive, so there are a few that went down, and those were averaged 18% decrease. Recreation fees were recommended at just an overall increase of 5%, so that one's easy. And then the building and safety fee schedule was restructured based off of the town's contract service provider. They recommended a different structure, so you'll see that in that draft fee report as well. So for policy discussion items, staff is recommending that we adopt a formal subsidy policy that would guide future fee studies and implementation of any sort of CPI adjustments in the future so that we don't wait 20 years. And then we also can guide future staff on kind of what the council's direction was for those subsidies. A policy, again, would direct future fee implementation as a guideline. And just as a reminder, with the 2004 fee study report, only recreation fees were subsidized. The council's policy at that time was to obtain full cost recovery for all other fee items. And the recreation fees were set at a rate to match other local jurisdictions. So it was surveyed from 29 Palms, Victorville, and we set those recreation fees to match theirs. So these are just a few examples of other city policies and what their fee schedule included. Basically, the easiest way to put that is on both of these, they took each department type, and then within that department, they did different tiers. So the tier would be the most amount of subsidy for a fee that benefited the community the most, and then the least amount of subsidy if it was very much a privatized fee cost that was only benefiting an individual. So that would kind of be a recommendation for how we would structure that policy in the future. And then the next steps after we have this discussion today would be to do a formal public hearing in the summer of 2023 and also a formal policy adoption at the same time. And then begin implementation of those fees most likely in July of 2024. So what staff is proposing for implementation is, again, to phase in those fees as they are quite high for some of the costs. We would want to defer full implementation of those that are going to be 100% cost recovery over a period of time effective July 1, 2024, so it would be concurrent with the next budget cycle. The reason we recommended that was just because fee schedules need to be prepared, printed, staff needs to be trained, software needs to be updated with those dollar amounts, and we already have some recreation schedules that are out in the public circulating, and we wouldn't want to have to change those when people go to sign up for classes. So these are just a couple ideas prepared by finance staff and up for discussion, and we would bring that back to the other department supervisors to get their input as well as what would work best for them. But we could do varying levels of 4-year, 2-year implementation and kind of phase everything in over time. So hopefully that is clear, concise fee study report review. I can answer any questions, but the recommendation is to receive and file the presentation and then provide policy direction for final adoption of the town's user fee schedule and formal subsidy policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any public comment on this item, on our draft fee schedule? Anyone online? Nothing online, back to the council? Any comments? I guess I'll just start off. I took some time to go through the numbers and kind of looked at the CPI during the time span that happened. I took from 2015 to now about 18 years, looked at it, and honestly got about 45% change from that time and what's going on, just as a flat roll-up number, and then compounded it over those years too to see how that would affect every single year. And the numbers look very much in line with what those are. I would have to say most of the items here, except for specialty services, looked like they chose about the median value for that. And so it looked like it penciled out really well for me, and it's a lot of work. There's a lot of categories, probably way more than in 2004, but I like the breakdown, and it makes it a little more tailored for the community as they look at service fees for our community. But that was my thought on it. I thought it was a very good presentation and very well laid out. Thank you.
Can you bring that slide back up that shows the recommendation of the, how quickly you're going to want to, or your staff's recommendation on bringing up the differences? Was it number 2, box 2, or what?
We haven't come up with an official recommendation. These are a couple ideas and up for discussion.
Yeah.
Finance department kind of numbered them 1 through 3 as like preference. But again, I would prefer to go back to departments and see how best to adopt that with their staffing. But the recommendation would be to do some formal deferral over a 2 to 4 year period starting July 1st, 2024.
So you put in an example of, let's say, Parks and Recreation fees. They weren't too far off of what our recommendation as far as increase. It was 5% or something like that.
Yes.
Is there a situation like for the following year, we just go ahead and do the whole 5% and then we're done with that portion?
So in the current draft report that you have, the subsidy that was provided was if a fee increased over 50%. So if it was $50 and then it went up to $150, we would subsidize a certain portion in the next year. And if a fee didn't increase that much, we would just go ahead and move to full cost recovery in that next year, so that the ones that were larger would phase in over time, and the ones that had smaller increases, you would already be getting that cost recovery. So
That
we could
makes sense.
implement
Instead of
that.
nickel and diming, trying to bring it up and
Yes.
it's just fragmented, it just doesn't make sense.
Yes.
So yeah, I like that approach. There also, what I look at are a lot of those things. There's 2 things. One is the fees for like nonprofits, uses of facilities and so forth. I don't mind that the community, that we decide to supplement the expense or donate the space for Mars Christmas or things like that. So this wouldn't affect those types of policies, is that correct? Or we would need to address those when we do the review?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, we have some separate agreements with nonprofits that have fees reduced, and those are contracts with the town based off of services provided. So that would be separate from this fee schedule.
And we
here.
can still do that in the future?
Yes.
Okay. And then, is there, trying to keep costs down, are there things that we could think of or programming or policies that we can do in like the planning department or permitting department and things like that, that either eliminate the need for a physical inspection? Like I'm thinking like a swamp cooler gets replaced. You have a swamp cooler, you need another one. Is there a thing where someone could just the contractor can take the picture of the new one, and that way we're not having labor go out there to go look at a swamp cooler replacement? Are there things that we have to where you could do a permitting process online, provide pictures to help save some costs? Or are there some softwares that we can purchase that cuts down on the labor intensity of doing the processing?
So the fee schedule as of now is based off of current staffing levels. So as the town were to adapt and change with new technologies, et cetera, those fee schedules would be updated on a more regular basis, and those analysis would be done more regularly. If there's any software changes or et cetera, it would come from the department, and then we would do more frequent reviews of how these fees are calculated.
So some of those fees may not increase as much as we anticipate if we end up getting software or policies that help cut down the labor. Okay.
Couple things. So there's self-certification that some cities use for certain types of building permits. That's a separate policy discussion that we would come back and have a conversation with the council with. In terms of software upgrades, there may be softwares that create maybe internal organizational efficiencies that are actually going to require more staff time to run the software programs and keep the data updated than what you're doing through performing the inspection. So all of those have to be reviewed on an individual basis. But as those opportunities afford themselves, staff will always be reviewing those. We're constantly looking at the most efficient ways that we can provide those services. So when those opportunities arise, we'll definitely look at those, and anything we need to bring to the council will be brought before the council.
And I appreciate that. That's exactly what I'm hoping that we continue to do. Thank you.
I just want to say, yeah, 20 years is a long time, so definitely something has to be done, and I agree, it can't be done all at once. So the schedule was, if I recall, was this summer to have the public meetings. Was that this summer? Okay. And I think that's good. And I think it's better to extend it out a little bit because there's a lot of information here. So probably 3 or 4 years, possibly 2, but definitely not 1 year. And anyway, I think all this will be dealt with in the summer. So that's a really good idea.
I think I want to thank you for all the effort in the report. This brings up kind of the idea of we need to develop a policy to try to use the fees to get what we want accomplished in our town. It's been 20 years since they've been updated, so there's probably a lot of money we left on the table over the time that we subsidized a lot of things. And it will be a little bit of a shock, I guess, when we go and look at some of the fees, but it's necessary to update them, and I think it's a good idea to update them on a more regular schedule. 20 years is way too long. Does the staff have a recommendation on how frequently these should be updated?
So we'll work with Wildan on when we put the fee schedule and the public hearing together on an adoption process for reviewing annual CPI, and then just updating the master fee schedule based off of that inflation factor on a more regular basis. So that will be included in the final adoption for you to review.
Okay. And then one other thought. A lot of times fees are used to encourage or discourage things you want done, like if you don't want something, you tax it, and you'll get less of it. And if you want to encourage something, you try to help or mitigate the cost to encourage it to happen. Like we do subsidize the community events where we provide the space and the cleaning and that sort of stuff at the town's expense for things like a charitable event or something where we are benefiting or the community benefits from it. The council should probably look at this and see if there's an opportunity for us to encourage the types of things that we want to be developed in the town that will help the town infrastructure, that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking of what kinds of things, what could our fee schedule reflect that would encourage the things we want in town? And we kind of need to talk a little bit about that. I would really like to have an open discussion with other council members and the public at different times to find out what we should encourage. Like, do we want more restaurants? Do we want more mom and pop businesses? Do we want big box stores? Those kind of things can be aided or thwarted by the way we do the fee schedules.
So we would just.
Is that correct?
I guess the short answer,
off on
the
a
short
tangent.
answer is no, that's not correct. That's not the intent of the fee schedule. Just go back and think of the little video that
But
we
the
provide.
intent of the fee schedule is to recover what it costs to do a certain thing for a certain individual or a group, right?
That's correct.
But we subsidize certain things that we want to encourage.
Yes, you will have that opportunity as you discuss the subsidy policy on certain activities. For example, a very simple example would be if you wanted to have a $5 inspection fee for a water heater because you think that's a good thing to do, then you can do that. You can do that in the subsidy policy. You can say that's a community priority that we have everybody's water heaters strapped down, so we're going to have the rest of the taxpayers pay it for that individual because we think that's a good idea. I'm not suggesting that, but what I'm saying is that's an illustration of in the policy, subsidy policy that we're going to bring back to you, you'll have ample opportunity to talk about those types of subsidies and what you as a council feel is appropriate.
I want a chance to be able to talk to that because I think along that same line, but maybe it's not applicable here. You can't ever go and recover more than what is the fee to do that thing.
That's correct.
But you might make the process easier or less expensive if you want something to be encouraged.
Yeah, I think this particular
Fine.
fee schedule is not going to move the bar in encouraging a certain type of development just for the fee schedules and permitting. I think like community development impact fees, things like that, or a special project where you waive future sales tax for a certain period of time to
Okay,
invite
those
a certain
fees are not
industry to
what
come
we're
in.
discussing
That's
at all.
not in this discussion, but those are things you can help encourage. Let's say you want a new car dealership to come into Yucca Valley.
That's
So
what I'm
then
trying
you
to
make an
talk about.
agreement that, as an incentive, we'll waive sales tax for a certain period of time, to have that type of thing. So I think that's where you're sort of
That's what
coming
I'm
from.
heading
You're trying to find incentives for certain developments, but I think this fee structure is just basically recovery on smaller dollar amounts like permitting fees and.
I seem kind of off
yeah.
on a tangent, but I would like to have a talk with you guys
Yeah.
on what things we could encourage to the town. Like you mentioned a car dealership, but there's all sorts of other things possibly related to the tourist industry that now makes up a bigger part of our budget. And what we can do to encourage those things.
And we could
Yeah.
definitely bring that up on a future
Okay,
agenda item.
I'm
Today,
sorry,
we
we'll
would-
do that in the
We'll go
future.
ahead and finish through on number 7, just on the fee study, and it's really just to bring it up to current standards. What we-
Overall, I
what we
like
have today.
I like the project. I think we're headed in the right direction.
Okay, I'd like to, if we could, put that pyramid slide up again. There we go. It went a little fast for me.
Closer up, picture about it. Maybe not. That was it.
Looks like.
Okay. Does that apply? It says on top, community services, recreation program, cost recovery model. That applies strictly to recreation, community services.
Yes, so in both examples here, they did different they split the cost recovery and subsidy by category. So recreation has its own tiers and varying levels of subsidy. So if, let's say in recreation, you have event costs and there's a registration fee, maybe there's a varying level of subsidy for those types of fees based off of what tier level it falls into. And staff, when they work with Wildan to create the schedule and the report, they would identify what tier those fees fall in, and then you would see what the range of subsidy would be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Is there a consideration for like age category or something like, do we subsidize little kids more than we subsidize adults or seniors more than
I think that would fall in then with what tiers and how you would want those to look. So if it's most community benefit would be considering that it's including seniors and children the most, then those fees would have the largest amount of subsidy.
Okay, that's a good way to look at it. So, so when we say recreation, we're counting museums, senior center services, and...
Yes, I believe Recreation Department specifically is, they have a long list in there, so, but it's going to be all of the contract classes, events. I believe the museum, if it has any sort of programming, would be included in there. So all of those would fall under recreation.
Okay, now did the consultant, did they measure our fees against other cities where recreation and like that's concerned, or just against ourselves?
Not in this fee report. In 2004, they measured recreation versus other areas in the region. We didn't do a regional comparison on this one.
Okay, all right. And then the question was asked, but I'm not sure I got that. What would be a typical next time we do this? Is that how many years out?
So we review CPI every year as part of just the finance reviews, so that we're seeing how much that is for personnel costs, et cetera. So when we do that review, we would see what that increase would be, and then we could opt to review it and look at it every year, or on if it's not a significant amount, then postpone that for another year. So that would be included as language in the fee adoption.
Recommendation, okay. All right, thank you.
Just as a comment on the different timelines that you looked at, I personally like number 2. It just seemed easy to digest for anybody. It's real simple, 2468. And then I guess at the same time, you're going to include that current CPI within that year to make it whole at the end.
Yes.
And then also, I do like, as long as things aren't, brought up in some type of manner that we weren't expecting, I really like how we work with a 2-year budget cycle, and to think that those kinds of adjustments would roll into those budget cycles to keep those numbers kind of consistent instead of alternating cycles.
Perfect.
Those are just my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a good point.
So as I understand it, excuse me, this is receive and file to later have a hearing on it for our fee schedule?
Yes,
Do we need a motion on it?
the recommendation, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one.
I'm on the wrong page too, so,
Receive and file.
okay.
It was to, nope, still the wrong one.
No, I think you're right. I was looking at other pages.
Yeah, it's to receive a file and provide direction, policy direction, which I believe I have enough here, so that should be good to go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that report, and I appreciate it, and the discussion too. With that done, we can move on to any future agenda items.
I have one thing.
Yes.
In the next couple months, or whatever it takes, I'd like to get back on track with talking about maybe maintaining arterial dirt roads. I know we have a committee on that, and I don't think not much has been done with that. So I'd really like to get that going and have some discussion on that.
Any other future
Good with
agenda
that?
items?
Yeah, I got one too.
Yes, please.
It's been alluded to a little bit this evening, but I've been approached by some people recently in town, businesses and individuals, that no matter how hard we try to communicate our process to people, and make it available on the website and staff, it just seems like what I'm hearing is that our processes are a little difficult to navigate, and so I'd kind of like to get maybe a review of what we're doing and what we could do to maybe make life a little easier in support of our businesses and individuals that need to access the system, but they don't do this all the time. They just they like one and done. They come in and they deal with the town, and just to make sure that it's a positive experience when they're dealing with us. Whether it's permits or whether it's just any kind of solving a problem.
Okay, so do I, just kind of an overview of, so
Of our-
a one-stop
maybe our customer
as a
service,
guide?
Our customer
kind of?
service, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
Good point.
I have one.
If that's the consensus of the council, be happy to do that. We like to think that we're doing that, but I know that there are probably ample opportunities that we can do a better job. So I think we would want to do some fact-finding and then come back to the council and have that
And let us
conversation.
know the review of, how we do that. How does our community feel about how they how easy it is to interact with the town staff and what the processes are.
Well, I try and browse around the applications and the website that the town has, and I certainly I enjoy our public outreach now, how we disseminate messages out there seems to work pretty well. But I don't really get into a lot of the areas like with recreation and stuff and signing up for activities, so I wouldn't be a good person to talk to about that, but maybe it's something I could take a little lesson on too. So I'll dig in myself if I can help you out with any comments on it. Anyone want staff to come back with something on that?
Well, I had mentioned that, I don't know if we have the staffing for it and so forth, but, if somewhere down the line, like you said, there's some type of liaison concierge service kind of thing where you go to one person and they can help you navigate where you need to go and have an idea of who you contact or the forms you might need. I don't know if that's even possible. I know that some communities that have a huge amount of growth and they have big demands for projects and building and all that, they have a person that helps those people navigate the process. If you want to open a business in Yucca Valley, this is how you do it. But I don't know if we have the bandwidth to hire somebody like that or have somebody trained in that area. But I do agree that anytime you deal with government, it's like a huge learning curve. And it's nice if somebody, sort of holds your hand through the process, or you have that one person to go to that has information. So I don't know what staff can provide on that or any thoughts, but if that's sort of what you're talking about, Jim, or...
I think it is, and even if it was maybe a webinar, a series of webinars that we just post on the website or something, it just kind of seems that some people who don't deal with this a lot have trouble navigating our system and don't feel like we're especially easy to deal with sometimes. And I know we make a lot of efforts to do that, and I know we really try hard, but sometimes I get this kind of feedback, and I have lately, so.
Is it business related?
Both individual and business, yeah.
Interesting. That we need to know more about it then, I guess. For sure.
So would council like to have staff look at some of those opportunities?
Yeah.
Is that what you're recommending? Is this
I think so.
with council member School?
Or maybe just a review of what we do, and if there's some ways we could do things better, in terms of customer service. Maybe it's that simple.
How about if we maybe plan a little workshop so we can brainstorm and get a more focused kind of idea for staff to work with? I'm not sure.
I think if it's
It could go all
the
over the place on
consensus of
this
the
one.
council, I think what I've heard would give us ample opportunity to go back to, like I said, do some fact-finding and then report back to the council. And it may be current status, it may be alternatives, it may be kind of a menu of things and what those may or may not do. And I would suggest that the frustrations that Councilmember Schooler has heard are not dissimilar in other communities, anytime that you're working with government or something that's outside of your realm. So there may be some lessons learned that other communities have tackled this problem, come up with other solutions that we're unaware of or things that we can do to improve. So we're happy to do that. Come back, give us a little bit of time to work through that, and then we return back to the council with an update.
Yeah, and perhaps...
I would agree with that.
Okay, and perhaps, we have a firm that we use for like public, the information, getting out newsletters and things like that. I don't know if they've ever developed any tutorial or any kind of a click on this thing and this is how you navigate the,
It's actually funny, Leslie and I have been working with Trepepi Smith, our communication consultant, on, what did we call that, the flyer? It's like a town resources guide that you can stick on
Yeah.
your refrigerator that talks about how you report graffiti, how you do this, how you do that, how you report a problem. So we're moving in that direction, but I think taking it at a next level and looking at some of the specific issues that may be out there, then we're happy to do that.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful. I know even like the recycling thing that Burtech puts out, what goes in recycling, what doesn't. I go back and refer to it a couple of times, like, okay, yeah, I'm not supposed to be putting that in recycling, but I need to start putting this stuff in recycling. So having that resource or that kind of a click on the website to be able to say, hey, this is what I have, this is the issue, here's where you go, or here's the link to this. So, yeah, that'd be great to look into that. I appreciate it.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks, staff, for that offer. I think that's a good way to start before we actually look for any direction change or, what we're going to do. Just for mine, I've been looking around our town lately. I am amazed at the hills being green, all the water we've had. There's actually a lot of little guzzlers and wet spots if you go out in the mountains in the areas of the washes. Still water for a long time. But I'm looking at spring cleaning too. While it's beautiful out in the desert and it's native, and I think in our town, I've noticed quite a bit of mustard growing, a lot of invasive plants. But also our native Joshua tree we were speaking about tonight, there's a lot of blooms this year that'll be happening. I see a lot of them budding out. But some folks just do a fantastic job. They really like to keep the invasive plants out. They like to keep the native plants in their yard, and they really encourage that growth. We spoke a lot of that tonight on Joshua trees. But there's other neighbors that aren't really good participants, and I've seen some yards where literally the mustard seed is so high I couldn't see the car in the driveway. And then the next door neighbor is really working hard. And I go, that's awesome. We've got some really good players out there, and I felt like maybe we should start kind of recognizing some of the people that really put in the time to make our community beautiful, like it is, and try and build that neighborhood love, of your own place. So I didn't know what we could do, for kind of recognition within our community, maybe something we could talk about in a future agenda item, just to start recognizing some of the people that are really doing a lot of stuff just in their own yard, really taking good care of it. And I think it's overlooked. I've stopped and talked to a couple of people around that were hula-ho in their yard and just told them, hey, you're doing a fantastic job, thank you. And they're like, what? There's weeds everywhere, and you're out here really making your yard look good, so I appreciate it. But I'd like to kind of reach out a little bit further than that and maybe do something a little bit formal. What got me started is just some of the discussion in town, and then recently the town had from Pepe on Facebook talking about, some of the spring cleanup that they could do in the yards and that kind of stuff. So maybe get a little reward program going of some kind. I don't know what it would be, but that's my
concept.
thought. Anything else? All right, then I'm going to go ahead and move on to public comments. Looks like we've lost a few people, but Town Council takes the time to consider your comments on items of concern which are not on the agenda. When you are called to speak, please state your name, community of residence. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less, and appropriate behavior which just disrupts, otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting and result in forfeiture of your public comment privileges. Town Council is prohibited by state law from taking action or discussion on items not on the printed agenda. So it's your time to speak about anything not on the agenda. Anyone? No? And online? We have someone online, thank you.
Yes, sir, we have Deborah Savitt online. Deborah Savitt, I will ask you to unmute. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Yes, welcome.
First of all, I'm going to be here for the Joshua trees, but I do want to thank you for the senior center. I have to give you a compliment on that. I love the senior center, and thank you for making that available to the public. I am not happy that you're completely rejecting the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act. There's many people in our community that do love the trees, and I feel like you need to represent that part of the community as well. So it would be wonderful, just like when you had the housing meeting with the Morongo Basin Conservation Association, if you would come together more with our scientists. Yes, I agree the fees are too high with the California Fish and Wildlife, but if there's some way we can get together and figure out how we can preserve these trees, yet still develop and really work together on this instead of completely rejecting that, I think it's the best way to go. I'm always hearing this thing, we have plenty of Joshua trees in the national park. It just upsets me because the first thing where my head goes is, like you want to cut down all the trees outside of the park, and also to say someone's going to lose their home, because of the fines. That sounds, I don't know if that actually happened, if you have an example, but that sounds very fear-based and drastic. So can we find the middle of the road somewhere? Maybe reach out to the Mojave Desert Land Trust with Kelly or Chris Clark Brendan Cummings. We have so many wonderful scientists that live in our community. The Morongo Basin Conservation, if we could just work together more. I think we took the right step at the housing meeting. Can we move forward with that and not be so, we're going to reject it? Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else online? No? Okay. Then we'll go ahead and bring it back to staff for reports and comments.
Alex, you have anything this evening?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We will be providing an update to the capital improvement projects in the next meeting. So I'll defer to that.
Thank you. Jordan, Deborah, anything? Captain?
Briefly, just one thing, Mayor and Council, good evening. Just want to let you know, last night we did have one of our police units involved in a collision here in Yucca Valley. So we had two deputies riding together in a vehicle at Pueblo Trail and Joshua Lane, where they witnessed a speeding vehicle with no license plates as they activated their lights and sirens and tried to catch up to it. They entered the intersection. Unfortunately, there was a 42-year-old resident of Big Bear who was on her way to work here in the Morongo Basin, and our deputies ran into that uninvolved motorist, sending her to the hospital with luckily minor injuries. She was treated during the late night hours last night and was released early this morning. Our deputies went to the hospital as well, not via ambulance, but they were treated for minor injuries and released. So all things considered, it was a pretty horrific scene, and both of the cars are totaled. But considering only minor injuries, we were pretty fortunate.
Thank you, Captain.
Shane, you have anything this evening?
Just a couple items this evening, Mayor and Council. Planning Commission recently approved the Chipotle project going into the Vaughn Center. That project has been submitted into Plan Check and Building and Safety. Does need to be returned to Planning Commission for their final approval of colors and signage. The Star, which is the former Diamond Automotive in Old Town, has been approved by the Planning Commission for change of use to restaurant, retail, coffee shop, and bar. That's currently in Plan Check with Building and Safety and moving forward. The Nice Dreams project, which is in the former Strata Tattoo Lounge building, has had initial review by planning staff, subsequent meeting with the applicant this week. There's probably a variance application that needs to be submitted to meet parking requirements, and there's probably going to be 2 waiver requests for infrastructure requirements that are established by code for that project to continue moving forward. That project may not be financially feasible based upon the costs that are associated and are established by policy within your development code and applied to all similar projects in the same manner. Hotel project off of State Route 247 in Lomita is scheduled to be coming in within about a week. That's a 20 separate pods of 325 square feet each and around a 1,500 square foot clubhouse. That's off of 247 and Lomita. Project is built around what? It's built around Joshua trees, so that it can move forward and not be subject to the incidental take permit process established by the state. I'll be sitting down with Alex, bringing Alex up to speed on dirt road policy issues within the town. That was probably the #1 policy discussion following incorporation between 1992 and around 2003. There is an established town council policy on dirt roads that's adopted by the town council. And that policy states, in order to bring a dirt road into the maintained system, the neighborhood will pay for the pavement of that road. And that policy was enacted for a number of different reasons, and staff will be bringing that information back to the council. There's a number of alternative ways of approaching dirt road issues within the community, but it's really interesting to look at. 29 Palms, County of San Bernardino, Hesperia, Victorville, Apple Valley, none of those jurisdictions take dirt roads into their maintained system, and there's many reasons for that. But we'll be presenting to the council alternative ways of addressing implementation of roadway infrastructure into different parts of this community. Finally, the abatement on Bannock Trail. The owner has authorized staff, town staff, to go onto the property and to do the cleanup on that work and securing of the structure. The contractor that the town will be using has a draft contract that we've provided, is reviewing that contract. Town Attorney's Office has created an alternative letter, authorization letter that has appropriate protections for the town, for the owner to sign. Hopefully that process will be moving forward here in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we'll have the contractor out on the site. I think those are my comments, unless there's any questions this evening.
Great, thank you, Shane. Council, we had an opportunity to meet with your Revenue Measure Oversight Commission last night. Spent some time with them talking about the Measure Y and Measure Z program, the benefit that that provides the community, both in terms of public safety, infrastructure, and quality of life with Measure Y, and then with assessment reduction for Measure Z. So good conversation. We have 6 members on that commission. We do have a vacancy there that we're looking to fill, as well as the current vacancy on the Planning Commission. So if you know of anyone in the public that's interested in serving on either of those 2 commissions, please have them get in touch with Town Clerk Leslie Copeland. She can assist with that. I heard from a very reliable source that the Easter Bunny is going to make an appearance here in Yucca Valley this Saturday, 9 o'clock. I even heard where he's going to be, out in the community center field. If you have anybody that's interested in checking out the Easter Bunny, be there at 9 o'clock. I've heard that by 9:10, most everything is done. So be there probably 8:50 for your best bet. And then lastly, not that my wife is here, nor is she subjected to watching these meetings online, but I just want to say happy anniversary. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary today, and she gets the pleasure of being at home by herself for tonight, eating probably something not very good. So we're going to try and get out next week, maybe for a couple of days, and celebrate that time. But thank you to her and our entire family. The kids and her put up with Dad being gone quite a bit, so I do appreciate that, and somehow it seems to work so far for 25. So thank you.
Very good. That's great.
That is wonderful. Well, congratulations. And you do give us a lot of time, and I appreciate that. We'll take it up to us, council member reports and comments. Councilmember Abel.
Yeah, well, thank you, staff, again, for all the hard work to put this agenda together and so forth. Nice to see you in person and have you here, and family visiting, so that's wonderful. The cutest kids in the world. You are a blessed woman, and thank you for all that you do for us. I do agree with some of the comments. It's really important for us as a community to come together. So I hope that coming together is in agreement that this council member appreciates our national park. This council member appreciates the national monuments that we have and the preserves, and also appreciates the Joshua Tree. And we, as a council, always appreciate projects that don't require any Joshua Tree takes. So part of that coming together would be recognizing that this council member does recognize and appreciate all the efforts to preserve the Joshua Tree. I just really want to have sensible conservation, ones that are balanced and well thought out and based on the science. So I appreciate all the comments from the public and for all those that are in attendance tonight. Congratulations on anniversary, 25 years. That's wonderful. And you are also a very blessed man to have such a wonderful wife and kids. With that, we have a basin-wide transit meeting that's coming up. It's called for Thursday of this week. So Councilmember Drodes and myself will be attending that. And then County City Conference is coming up as well, which is always a great time to learn more about what's happening in our state, in our county, and with all of our cities. So I'm looking forward to gathering more and more information to help bring back that information to our community and make it a better place. Again, thank you, council members, for doing an excellent job and being prepared, and look forward to a wonderful and prosperous new year with April, spring coming soon. I think winter is is over with in my mind. So I hope, hopefully, the weather will cooperate with that. So with that, thank you very much for being here tonight.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Droz?
All right, congratulations, Curtis and Becky. 25 years, that's pretty incredible. That's neat. And it's nice you're here. And Jordan, I think you've been married less than that, and you have 5 kids, so that's pretty incredible. They're all very, very cute. So I got to see them before the meeting. I want to congratulate the town on a successful senior dance. I didn't go there, but I saw the pictures online, and that looked really incredible. So that was a successful event. I was going to mention the Easter thing on Saturday, but Curtis did. So we have the little hint about the Easter Bunny being there. And I want to mention Joshua trees also. I think the best way to conserve Joshua trees are through agencies like Mojave Desert Land Trust. We all want to preserve them. I think almost everybody anyway on their property. But Mojave Desert Land Trust, they buy up land before it's built on. And it conserves that land for future generations. And I want to commend them because that's the most important thing you can do. We already have our national parks, national monuments, and our, the national preserves, but they are buying up land and saving it for future. So that's an incredible thing. So everybody have a great Easter, and we'll see you at the next meeting.
All right, thank you very much. And Councilmember Schooler?
Yeah, Jordan, good to see you in person, and the report was great. I think in this financial environment that we have, it's we don't always feel real comfortable, but I personally do with you managing our finances. So good report, and thank you again for that. And also, I agree with the other council members regarding the Joshua trees. I don't think there's any animosity toward Joshua trees. I think everybody that lives here loves them and respects them and wants them in their yard. And it breaks our heart when one falls down or something. But I think what we are looking for is some reasonable solutions that allow us all to do what we want to on our property and respect the Joshua tree. I just don't see where there's any anybody. I don't know of anybody that doesn't like having Joshua trees on their property. So anyway, leave it at that. This is wildflower season, and to me, that's allergy season. And I appreciate the people who have cleaned up their weeds and everything, but there's so much ragweed and everything out there. I would encourage everybody, it's got to happen sometime, so better sooner than later to get those. Actually, I heard the mayor say hula hoeing as that's a verb. Some people are hula hoeing, and that's something that nobody else in the rest of the world knows, but that's a verb we use here, and we all understand what that means. But so we should be hula hoeing as soon as possible for my taste. Thank you for the project's update, Shane. I didn't hear about Black Bear Diner. Is there an update on that? I've been asked about that.
Their building permit has been available for them to pull for, it was in excess of 30 days. They may have come in recently, finally, and pulled that permit. But they were very slow in coming in and picking up their approved plans and their approved permits.
Okay, so we don't have a real time frame on that.
From my discussions with building and safety staff, they probably have a 6-month construction window, maybe a little bit longer than 6 months. They've just been wrapping up their applications for color change and signage through planning to go back to the Planning Commission. But their representatives have been very slow in moving that project forward.
Okay, thank you. And then the Planning Commission and Revenue Measure Oversight Committee application deadline, what would that be? Do we have a time frame on that?
The application deadline for those is April 26th.
April 26th, so there's still a lot of time. Okay,
Yep.
Thank you. And then I'll add my congratulations and happy anniversary to Curtis and Becky. Good job. I didn't realize you were working today on your anniversary. But yeah, good job. Congratulations. And that's 25 years. Okay, thank you. That's me. That's it for me.
Mayor Pro Tem?
We'll have to do a better job of planning our next council meeting so that we're not interfering with your anniversary next time. My wife, Mary, and I will be celebrating our 30th before the next council meeting, and thank goodness it's not on the council meeting. I've missed enough already. It was, I'll make it unanimous about the Joshua trees. I also like them on my property, and I appreciate them. I don't want them destroyed, but we need a practical solution to the problems that face our community in allowing people to utilize their property for reasonable development and for town projects to continue without being slowed down and increased in cost due to the Joshua tree. And I'm hoping that there'll be a solution. And I, for one, am willing to work with any conservation group if they want to discuss how we can make the things that we're trying to achieve more practical and more balanced than a black and a white yes or a no kind of thing. But I think that we do have an obligation to the community to protect what we see as their rights that are being diminished when it's a one-sided thing. And in a way, what happened with the Joshua tree was kind of left Yucca Valley way out without a reasonable path forward. I think the moratorium on the Joshua trees created a lot of problems for projects that needed to happen, like the sewer and the safe routes to schools and that sort, and the Brem Park thing. All those added cost to our ability to do things. And there are many instances of individuals who wanted to develop their property and were thwarted by either the cost or the process of permitting fees and that sort of thing. So I'd love to talk with anybody that's interested in trying to find a more balanced pathway, especially the conservation groups. What else? I'm off track. Well, I'll just, everything's been said pretty much, so I'll just be quiet and have a good night. Enjoy Easter. I have some experience as the Easter figure in the past, and have really enjoyed that opportunity, and boy, do they go fast. Those, be there definitely at 9 o'clock, because it's over very shortly after. But it's a lot of fun, and I encourage anybody in the community to be involved in it. It's a wonderful thing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And Jordan, I'll just mention thank you very much for being here this evening and all the work that you presented tonight. Hope you'll take advantage with your children of the Easter egg hunt. You got to get there early. Make sure they get their fair share. I'll just say one thing on the Western Joshua Tree. Everyone else made mention, but I just hope we can achieve some kind of common sense approach that's sustainable. Those are the things. Right now, we have too many people in the kitchen, and it doesn't seem like things are running in alignment very well. So that's all I have on that. I'm very happy to say to Pippi Smith for some of the outreach they've been doing. They seem to get a better grasp on what our community is as time goes on, and I think the messages are getting clearer and clearer, more focused on some of our activities. So thank you very much. With that, everybody, wish you the best Easter, hopefully with family and friends, and enjoy the Easter egg hunt. So, Curtis, I hope you and Becky have an opportunity to get away for a bit. You've earned it, and take a break. And for that, I'd just like to make an announcement. Our next regular meeting in the Yucca Valley Town Council will be held on Tuesday, April 18th, 2023, at 6 p.m. right here in the Yucca Valley Community Center Yucca Room. And with that, we'll call this meeting adjourned.